Welcome to everyone. I recognize a few names on the panel, so thank you very much in the chat for joining us today. So AgriWebb, essentially where we fit into your tech tools on farm, is we are the livestock management solution for lots of people on this call today. So we look after the livestock management part of your business, your paddock management, as well as overall business management. So we really do take into that holistic livestock management software functionality. We have an individual animal management system, which can be seen on the screen here. And we also run a mob system. So if you're running sheep or large number of cattle, the mob system might be for you. Thanks, Matt. So AgriWebb essentially is really a lot of the value in what we provide our producers and our customers is really the reporting and the insights that we can help you with on the back end. So you're putting the data in on the ground, and how are you going to use it? How are you going to get that information out to make better decisions on farm? That's where we come in. So we really do take all of those records, such as movements, treatments, transfers, all of that stuff, and collate these really interesting detailed reports that give you insights into your operations and help you make better decisions on where your farm's going to go in the future. So why grazing on AgriWebb? There's a few options. Obviously, planning with ease. We have a few tools to help you plan your grazing, one of those being Cibo Labs, which is here with us today. Managing on the go, so making it flexible. So if you are using our grazing planner in collaboration with Cibo, how can you make those plans flexible? We know nothing really goes to plan on farm. As much as we all think it and we want it to, sometimes things just happen and we need to go out there and make on-the-go changes. And AgriWebb's designed to help you with those. We also have lots of different user roles. We have lots of different ways to share your data so that you can share it with not only everyone on your farm team, but you can actually download your reports or add your agronomist onto AgriWebb. You can share with your financial advisor. You can share with your animal health nutritionist. We allow you to have full control over your data and who you share that with. So there's the three fundamentals: plan, manage, and analyze. In terms of the grazing, you can use the planning functionalities like setting your animal units on production calendars, adjusting those based on live weights on farm. We can utilize Cibo Labs for your feed on offer readings, as well as a range of different tools to help with that. Managing, recording your animal moves, the visual maps, tracking your grazing days, and also understanding your stocking rate on farm. And then analyze part of it really comes into those reports, understanding your moves. What is your stocking rates looking like? What does it look like with our 100 mil of rainfall and our paddock grazing intensity? Those reports can be really, really helpful for your agronomists or people maybe who are helping you with your grazing management on farm, or just to review yourself. You can learn a lot about some of your most productive paddocks and also your least productive paddocks by recording this basic information on AgriWebb. This is a great customer from Claire. So she says, we love it. We love AgriWebb. We love AgriWebb. We were able to combine and revisit rotational grazing techniques we learned in a grazing workshop and your software, AgriWebb. It's easy and flexible and to adjust our plans, which is where it's most important. Thanks, Matt. I'll hand over to Phil.
Okay, thanks, Izzy, and welcome everyone, and thank you very much for coming and joining us today. It's a pleasure to be here with you all. I suppose Cibo Labs is similar but different in many ways with AgriWebb, and our big focus is on staying in our lane and really being a technology service provider to the grazing industry, and to be focusing on the feed base and be able to monitor that feed base through time. It's really about profitable and sustainable farming operations. So we've got a team of highly skilled specialists with domain knowledge. Our entire team have backgrounds in agricultural and environmental science as well as data science. And we've got a suite of services that we've developed over the last 8 years to really help producers and support them in their grazing management decisions. So we have a pasture key service, which is integrated with AgriWebb, which is paddock level satellite imagery every 5 days and a sophisticated machine learning model sitting behind it. The Australian Feed-Based Monitor, which is a service for every livestock producer in Australia for free in partnership with Meat and Livestock Australia. And we're also doing a lot of work on environmental credentials and a range of commissioned R&D as well, which we won't go into today. But we really are focusing on that, those spatial and temporal dynamics of a farm, and to be able to monitor that farm consistently through time. So I suppose the key things for us is really about the feed base, understanding what the variability in the feed base is, and a great quote from John Fritz a few weeks ago, is really it's about your grass is your bank, and how big is the haystack in the paddock. So that's really I've really taken that sort of one liner from John. I'm going to be using over and over again. If you're there, John. But really, it is about giving people confidence and some objective information around what feed they've got in front of them right now, how long is that going to last, and under what scenarios they're going to have to change their management decisions. So it's really about accurate, objective, and repeatable data, and using these new satellite technologies to support our decision making, but also importantly to understand that it's not a silver bullet. Our pasture feed system, we've got something in the order of 8,000 field sites now. It doesn't happen by magic; it happens by calibration on the ground, and so we're reliant on working with producers to tune the model over time and improve the model over time. So there's a lot going on in the satellite imagery, and it's really underpinned by lots of ground calibration and working with producers to make sure that it's achieving what they need on the ground. In terms of the nature of the products, so on the top left there, every 5 days you're getting satellite imagery. The top left there is showing this sort of pseudo natural color image, and giving an understanding of the variability that's happening in the paddock. Obviously, cloud cover is a significant issue at particular times of the year, so that top left image gives you an understanding of whether you've actually got cloud impact or not. Bottom left there, we've got a fractional cover product which provides an understanding of the photosynthetic activity. And then on the bottom right there, we've got an example of ground cover. Now, this particular property hasn't got the ground cover issues at the moment, but it really is about understanding that true variability that exists across your farm and within the paddocks, and look at how you use that information to make long-term improvements to exploit that variation that you have in property rather than having it as ignorance. And I suppose then in terms of the pasture, obviously when we're looking at the feed base, people often ask us questions around pasture quality, and we are working on pasture quality measures around digestibility and energy, protein. While we're working through that, we do have some quite simple measures around growth stage. So on the top left there, we've got our total standing dry matter estimate, which is just pure kilos of dry matter per hectare. But we've then also got the ability to use our other systems to identify the percentage of green vegetation and also the percentage of dry vegetation. So you can see there on the top left, on the bottom left, property only a couple of weeks ago, it's got in the order of a couple of thousand kilograms of dry matter across the property. On the top left there, you can see the purple. It's actually a lot of biomass, up to 5,000 kilos in some of those paddocks. And if you look there on the bottom right, you can see that those paddocks that are purple on the top image are actually dry vegetation. So it's probably dry fescue or dry phalaris, which has got obviously limited energy and digestibility, and to be able to use that information to start to drive how you utilise the stock classes in those paddocks. And in those big heavy paddocks, you wouldn't be putting sheep in them necessarily, probably putting your cattle in those paddocks to knock that feed over. So we've got some measures on pasture quality there now. And also just some simple tools around the whole from the farm to the nation. So looking at your region, looking at what the sale yards are doing, we've got some tools there through the feed-based monitor to give you some simple analogues on how this season is tracking out. In the bottom left there, you can see how the season's tracking out relative to the previous years. I was at Holbrook a couple of weeks ago, and they haven't had an autumn break, or had one autumn break in 7 or 8 years, and in that particular area, it's actually usually reliant on the autumn break, and that sort of information came out in that graph. On the bottom right there, you've got an example there of a pasture decile, giving an idea of where the current season sits relative to all of the previous Augusts. And you can see here this particular farm in central New South Wales is sitting around the middle, but in the areas to the north are experiencing higher than average, and the areas below are experiencing lower than average seasons. So some real implications there in terms of not just your individual farm, but also what that means for the region in terms of animal pricing, for example, sale yard prices. And then some simple, just to finish off here as well, some simple benchmarking tools. So on the graph on the top left there, we can do things like compare you to your neighbours and provide an idea of where you sit relative to your neighbours in terms of your pasture production. So this particular property, that green line is showing that it's basically in the top 25% in terms of pasture production over time. And on the bottom one there, we've actually got a ground cover image there, and it's showing you that seasonal variability in ground cover. But again, the blue line is sitting at the top of the graph there. So compared to the neighbours, that property is achieving higher ground cover levels than its neighbours, while it's actually also achieving higher pasture production and higher carrying capacity. So some real lessons there in terms of the impact of grazing management on your land condition as well as your carrying capacity.
Amazing. Thanks, Phil. Izzy, I might toss it back to you if you wanted just to briefly chat about why AgriWebb and Cibo Labs are even here today.
Sure. AgriWebb and Cibo Labs have really formed a good partnership, I think, Phil. I feel like we're good friends now. But essentially, one reason what we've found for a lot of our producers is that manually recording your feed on offer and using your MLA ruler and going around and doing all your paddocks, sometimes one, your paddocks are just too big, or you might have too many if you're in a southern region, you've got 80 paddocks, and trying to keep up with all those manual rulers and things like that, it does take quite a bit of time. Or maybe you're just not too experienced and you're not really trusting your eye yet in terms of where you think your feed on offer is sitting. So having a satellite monitoring system has really helped a lot of producers in understanding, I guess, where their paddocks are sitting in terms of that feed on offer. As Cibo Labs has gotten better over the years, the data is becoming a lot more accurate. We're finding a lot of producers are really enjoying seeing this. Obviously, up north, we've got farmers that have paddocks 4 times the size of the farm I'm on today who genuinely just can't get around their pastures to measure their feed on offer. So having a satellite integration has been really helpful for those guys. And in the south, it is just shoring up that gut feel of where your pastures are sitting and making that a more accurate and a more consistent data collection. So you can see on the right hand side here that the Cibo Labs readings come through every 5 days. So when you're looking at the history of your paddock, that will come up straight at the top. And that Cibo Labs icon there will soon, you'll be able to click on that and it will take you straight into that Cibo Labs pasture map. So if you are seeing that maybe the number of total stranding dry matter just doesn't sure fit right with what you're seeing on the farm, if you click through there to Cibo Labs, you'll be able to get that more detailed view of your pastures and things like that, which might answer a few of your questions in terms of that standing dry matter number that's coming through. We have the dry matter utilization and the wastage and detachment records available in AgriWebb, and essentially you can apply, for example, that 80% reading of utilization to your total standing dry matter, and AgriWebb helps calculate a little bit of that maths for you to say that 80% of 1400 kilos, for example, is where we're coming through. You then can set your pasture growth rate. I know down here we can use that forage forecaster website and you can sort of get an update on your pasture growth rates. You can pop that in there and you can set your target residuals, which is really important because we want to make sure that we have a date or sort of a level that we want to keep our grass to at minimum. And AgriWebb will then calculate the available feed on offer. So based on a bunch of these factors, we calculate that this paddock has 300 kilos of dry matter per hectare. You then apply stock on that and you get some really interesting insights about how many days grazing capabilities does that pasture have. It's a really visual tool. We have an insight available on the map. So if you wanted to get that whole farm view and just see how your feed on offer is going across your block, you can turn that on and get that snapshot across each of your paddocks. So it's a really scientific data-backed tool that integrates into AgriWebb that we find has really helped a lot of our producers as well.
Thanks, Izzy. And yeah, just to reiterate, yeah, the goal of this integration, first and foremost, was right to bring everything into one place, but knowing there's such powerful data and map insights on the Cibo Labs pasture key side, we're trying to make it as easy as possible for you all as producers using both platforms to essentially be able to toggle between the two to obviously experience that full value of Cibo Labs as well.
Yeah.
Thank you both so much. I even learned even more about just the enhancements and improvements and just where everything's at today. Definitely taking away that quote, "Your grass is your bank." So love that one. I'm definitely going to be using that. And I think overall, right, the goal of this presentation as we roll forward is very much around how are we allowing you all joining us today to grow in your confidence as you're driving into, spring grazing season, specifically in these scenarios that we're about to cover. So really to kick things off, what we'll do is we'll focus on a scenario. Specifically, the first one will be around planning. I'll let Izzy and Phil just share their perspectives on how you can think about data and technology to support in those specific scenarios. And then we'll look to see if there's a question or two we can answer and then move on to the next scenario. So really to kick things off, as we've talked about, we want to think about planning, right? And in this case, it's forage budgeting for the future. We really wanted to be respectful, right? Knowing that people are coming from different places. So we actually came up with two scenarios. Maybe you're coming into spring grazing with one of these. So the first one is really around, you've got calves dropping in the spring months coming, and you're going to need to know if, your pastures are going to be able to support that growth of your calves throughout the summer. The other one is, right, some folks are coming out of a dry season, and so you need to effectively be able to build your forage budget. So, Izzy, I might start with you and then we can toss it over to Phil. But Izzy, as you've been working with customers that are dealing with both of these scenarios, how are you encouraging them and guiding them to use AgriWebb to really support that planning here with grazing coming up in the spring?
Yeah, absolutely. I can happily talk about it from my perspective at home as well. And being based in the Riverina, I've obviously got a bit more of a southern view on this, but I did have the opportunity to go up north, so I've got a bit of a gauge on how New South Wales, I guess, season is tracking. And one of the ways that we're sort of encouraging our producers to start that planning process, if you are someone who has confinement lots that you've been feeding most of the year in a confinement situation, we're getting a bit of rain now. How are we going to manage that? Letting our cattle or sheep back out onto that pasture and making sure that we're managing our pastures effectively for that growth for the spring season, but also to maintain it through to summer. One of the ones that we're finding that people can really get a better insight is that DSC and LSU updating that number. At the moment, the mob system, for example, on AgriWebb, that DSC is calculated based on the MLA average, not the live weight or the production status of your animal. So if you've got a lactating cow or a third trimester cow, you're not going to see that DSC will go up. So going in and actually updating your DSCs of your mobs is going to give you a much more accurate stocking rate so that you can start planning effectively because you've got a better understanding of the stock loads that are actually going to be on your pastures rather than you just, I guess, using the average. Another way that we're finding that people are getting their things up and going in terms of planning and management is you might have done a bit of water work or done some infrastructure work over the dry time. Updating your fence lines is going to be really important, especially if you have feed on Cibo Labs integrated. For example, at home, we've put in a heap of tree lines this year, and the last couple of weeks as we've got a little bit of rain, and we haven't mapped those out yet. So essentially, what we need to do is go into AgriWebb, map up those tree lines or I guess heavily vegetated areas into vegetation plots so that when we do get our Cibo Labs reading in 5 days' time, you're going to get a Cibo Labs reading for your actual grazable area of your paddock, not the area that's been excluded for a tree line, for example. This example can also go into anything with really heavily wooded areas or anyone with a forestry. Separating out your vegetation on your map is going to make your feed on offer readings that come through from Cibo a lot more accurate because if you just leave it to the whole paddock, you're going to get an average total standing dry matter across those two areas. Well, in reality, only the grazable area is actually going to be used. So we want to make sure that we've got that mapped out in AgriWebb so that it's more accurate. And again, mapping things out in AgriWebb, put your water lines in. If you've done some updating to your infrastructure on farm because it's been dry or you put more pipelines in, I know we have. On farm at home, we've actually gone into AgriWebb, put in our pipelines on the map using a landmark. We've coloured those pipelines, the actual colour of the poly. So in a few years' time, if we're ever updating our fence lines or a pipe burst, we know exactly based on our AgriWebb map, what colour the pipe is. Now, the way that all those things sort of integrate, obviously the water is probably a little bit separate, but it's still a really important one to talk about. But having up accurate stocking units, accurate feed on offer and paddocks, grazable areas and things like that is only going to give you more information for your business to make better decisions in terms of your grazing planning and management. So whether you need to destock because you've got too many stock on, you've got capacity for more stock because your feed's going to be quite high, or you might be looking at implementing a fattening rotation for your steers, for example, on your most productive paddocks. By having all of that information accurate, you're able to sit down and go through each of those steps and make that plan. I guess if you're not starting with the fundamentals and the basics and updating those little things, you're not going to have additional information to sit down and make a plan on how to manage your grasses, how to manage your pasture coming out. Because I know a lot of people don't have a lot of feed in the shed. So we need to manage any feed that's coming out of the ground in the most effective way possible in that like southern situation as well.
Awesome. Great stuff, Izzy. And yeah, I think what I definitely took away from that is if you can start yourself with accurate data, so whether that's fence line, tree cover, obviously your animal units and how you're tracking that, it's really going to set you up for success when it comes to planning. Phil, I'm going to toss it over to you and let you talk through, yeah, this map here and obviously what Cibo can do to help with planning.
Yeah, and just emphasising what Lizzie just said it there as well. The importance of keeping your paddocks up to date is really important. The paddock map inside AgriWebb is actually the point of truth, and getting those net grazable areas actually is really really important. So with this map here, I'm showing you this is a property near Canowindra, and even within this, it's a mixed farming region. This particular property here is a regenerative grazing property, high intensity grazing, and even in that scenario there where you've got high stocking rates and pretty small paddocks, you can still see there's actually significant variability in biomass in those paddocks. And those paddocks up in the north there, those purple areas, we're estimating 4,000 to 5,000 kilos and even higher of dry matter in those paddocks. And that's probably some really dry old rank fescue or phalaris that hasn't been utilised. And obviously to get that knocked down, you've really got to look at the grazing strategies there. So those paddocks have probably been rested and mightn't have been grazed for 12 months perhaps, but there's those sort of things around. What does the average paddock total sand dry matter or the FOO mean relative to the variability in the paddock? And so, so the big emphasis for me is for you to look at the averages when they're coming through into AgriWebb, but also when that average doesn't make a lot of sense, go and have a look at the map. And it could be that the net grazable area of the paddock needs to be modified if you've got a lot of timber in there, or you could actually have a cloud sitting straight over the top of that paddock, and you might need to put in a manual reading where we're not able to get through the ground with the satellite data.
That's great, Phil. And yeah, I totally agree with the idea that sometimes, technology, whether it's AgriWebb, Cibo, whatever it is, it's making you consider what, is happening on ground. So even if you are seeing numbers that don't look specifically accurate, part of it's also just helping you all understand, oh, maybe I do need to check that paddock, or, oh, I actually need to look at how you said, Phil, rearranging my paddocks and get those updated in the technology themselves. So you all are the experts of your land, your forage, but we definitely want to figure out how we can best support you and as you're managing that. We'll dive into the next scenario. I wanted to see if we had any questions. I don't think we have any. So just another reminder I put into the chat. If you have questions specific to these scenarios, don't hesitate to put those there. We definitely want to make sure you're feeling confident in, what data points you should be thinking about or how this technology can support what you're doing. Oh, I do see a question from Stephen around, just wondering why when I have entered FOO manually for a paddock, the available feed on offer is showing 0. I guess, Izzy, is that one that you'd want to tackle right now?
Give me 5 and I'll just have a look, see
I'll give you
what's going on Stephen's farm. Let me just have a little look and I'll see what's going on. I'll get back.
I'll give you 5 and we can even dive into the next scenario. How does that sound? And Phil, we'll even lob things over to you. Love a bit of customer success. Yeah, like customer success on a webinar, right? How good. So in this case, right, so now we've planned out our grazing management, rotations, and we're in the middle of it now. So we're making real-time decisions. We need to be leveraging data points. How are we doing that? So again, 2 specific scenarios here. One is you're 3 to 4 weeks out from your contract deadline, right? And you need to know how many of your steers are actually going to reach that target weight. The second one then is maybe you're midway through your grazing plan and you just need to understand if you have enough feed remaining to make it to the next wet season. So 2 specific, areas here. We'll skip here and I'm going to pass it over to you, Phil. We can always go back to Izzy, but I'll let you take it away. This is a good one for Cibo.
So I suppose the first scenarios there we talked about were really probably a little bit southern focused, and we're in the southern areas. You can have potentially rain at any time of the year and growth. In the north, obviously, we've got a few Queenslanders. I've seen there's a few people from Billawheeler and a fella from Namibia as well, where you've got these monsoonal systems, and you might only have one growing season or 1.5 growing seasons. And so we have some simple tools in Cibo Labs to help you to run some feed calculations. And so the starting point in here, I'm going to walk you through an example, is to go and inspect your imagery. So typically you'd be doing this at the end of the growing season, say in the end of April or early May, but really you can do it at any time of the year. So looking at the imagery and making sure you've got some clean imagery, looking at the available pasture biomass products there as well, so you can look at that variability, and you can look at the grazing utilisation of every paddock and see whether you're getting some even utilisation. We've got some tools there to test some assumptions, and then we've got some tools to help you estimate your seasonal carrying capacity. I'm just going to go through an example of that I've done now. Please go to the next slide there, Matt. So we've got a simple calculator here. So I suppose what we're doing here, AgriWebb, we've got some very sophisticated grazing planning tools in terms of those rotational grazing systems. And I suppose what this is doing is adding some value to that to give you some synoptic view of your season as it plays out, particularly in northern Australian systems where you've got some larger paddocks and some longer dry seasons. And hopefully you can see in there, but this little grazing calculator in here, we've set a grazing period from now until the end of January, when we might get some rain. We've got some anticipated growth, maybe through a few early storms. We might get 100 kilos of dry matter, perhaps across the property. We're using an average animal equivalent here of 8.5 kilos of demand a day. So, as you mentioned earlier on, it's really important to be using some standardised animal units, whether they're DSEs or AEs or LSUs. But through the season, obviously your animals are growing, and so you need to be looking at how your mob or your flock actually fits within that AE or DSE category. We've then got a minimum residual of 1,000 kilos. We don't want to graze the pastures down to less than 1,000 kilos. We've also then got to look at how not every blade of grass is usable. So we've got some simple tools in there for you to look at the unusable pasture. So that could be the unpalatable pasture. So I've discounted that by 10%. The unpalatable 3P. Sorry, this is a little bit blurry. I need to get a better version of this next time. That pasture that is normally palatable, but it could have been through some late season rain, might be quite rank now. And we've also got some wastage values there as well. So typically in Northern Australia, you might have 25% detachment. So we're allowing you to put in those scenarios, and also a scenario of not grazing any more than 30% of that pasture. So you can simply set up those assumptions, look at the paddock scale or the farm scale, and we can also look at DSEs or AEs as well. So then we'll hit the go button, and in a couple of seconds, just the next one there, Matt. In a couple of seconds there, you've just got this is only showing a subset of the paddocks. This farm's got about 100 paddocks, I think. But right at the top there, we've got a bit of a trend line in terms of the pasture through the season. You can see there in June, there's been a dip. That was actually some frost events. And then this is probably through central Queensland. And interestingly, there's been a very, very slight, only to the tune of a couple of 100 kilos per hectare, but a very, very slight growth through the winter in some places. Then there was a warm event, and we actually got some significant growth, and now it's turning again. So even within that dry season, we've actually had a little bit of variability. And then what we're doing there is providing you with a whole farm estimate. So based on those assumptions, we could run 3,300 animal equivalents if we graze down to 1,000 kilos, or if we're only looking at utilising 30% of the available feed, we'd run at about 2,400 animal equivalents through the end of January. And then below, I won't go into the detail there in the table, but we've got some just simply working across those assumptions. You can go through and then change your assumptions per paddock. And so on the left-hand side there, we've got the paddock names, the sizes, wastage, unusable, growth, residuals, useful pasture. And then on the right-hand side there, we've got what the total available is, what the average feed intake is, and then we're telling you basically an estimate per paddock of what the number of stock at the residual. So if it grows down to 100 to 1,000 kilos, I think you'd run 130 odd animals through to the end of January. But if you only graze at 30% utilisation, you put about 85 or 90 animals in that paddock through to the end of January. So it gives you some synoptic views, and then our guide would then be to, once you've done this, to then drive this information back into the grazing planner inside AgriWebb to implement your seasonal strategy.
Amazing. That was so helpful. I guess, again, I think this is really cool to see how this works in Cibo. So if folks have questions on, in your scenario that you're going through right now, would love for those questions to flow through. I have a hunch that Izzy might have a response to you, Stephen. So if you're okay with that, we might answer that on. I was going to say on the air, like it's a radio station, but on this webinar. So I'll let you take it away, and I'll back up to some of these slides with AgriWebb as well.
Yeah, perfect. So Stephen, I just had a quick look on your block, and the reason your feed on offer is coming up as 0 is because that on today that you set your feed on offer as 8 kilograms per dry matter per acre. Actually, you have your settings on acres. So, and your target residual is still set, I think, at 405. So because you've only got 8 kilos, technically, if that's your reading, and your target residual is set at 405, AgriWebb's going to say, well, you said that your minimum is going to be 405, so therefore you have no feed on offer. So why we do this is because it helps with that planning element. So let's say your feed on offer, instead of 8, it was 800. AgriWebb would say there was 400 kilos of dry matter of feed available because you have a residual set. Those residuals help us put your plan together in terms of having that minimum number of the feed on offer that you want to eat it down to. Some people have it set for 1,000, some people have it set for 200. It's all personal preference. So you can go ahead and manually change that. You can bulk change it for all of your paddocks if you say that, everything I wanted to be at 200. And that way, when you go in and do your manual feed on offer readings, you can get that total feed on offer to make sense as well. Let me know if I didn't answer that enough for you. And now, Matt, I do have another question that I've just came through on the Q&A that I feel like could be one for Phil and I to answer together. Locke, in terms of why heavily timbered pasture paddocks affect the accuracy of Cibo measurements, is essentially the timbered country, from my understanding, Phil, correct me if I'm wrong, is when it's all together as one paddock on AgriWebb, it really throws off the average total standing dry matter, which is the record that comes through into AgriWebb for the whole paddock. The reason we say to separate it out is because you'll get one reading for all the grass, one reading for, let's say, half a paddock of just grass. We'll get that reading, total standing dry matter, which is going to be more accurate of just the grasses. The heavily timbered country, if it's the satellite can't read through the trees, I'm imagining, Phil, can't really pick it up. So it's going to get a different reading for that side. In order of managing that, though, in AgriWebb, what I would do in that example is I would just run a gate. So you'd put a gate in between those two areas, and you'd say that the gate's open, so the cattle technically could be on the grass or under the trees, but you're still getting a feed on offer reading for just the grass section or just the wooded areas. Phil, do you want to hit away about the
Yeah,
size
so
of the satellite?
we've had examples too where there's been someone that's at a 100-hectare paddock with a creek line running through the middle of it, and they go and cultivate half the paddock, and it's basically zero biomass, and then it's got 3,000 or 4,000 kilos on the other side of the creek. And clearly, under those scenarios, whether it's half timber and half cultivation, or somebody from pasture type, or a big hill in the middle of a paddock, what you want to try and do is to, within your AgriWebb system, to have as homogeneous paddocks as you can, really. And so if you've got some significant differences in the potential utilisation across those paddocks, you can put in those sort of, map the vegetation, or put in some virtual fences so the averages are more meaningful for you. In terms of your question, Locke, around the accuracy through the trees, clearly when we've got dense trees, the satellite can't see through those dense trees. But if you're flying over those trees and you can see the ground, so in northern Australia, savanna woodlands, we get through to the ground most of the time. In northern New South Wales, those now beautiful grassy sort of woodland and grassy forests. If we've got some fairly open canopies, still see it through the ground. Our estimates under the canopy won't be as accurate as they are in open country, but we'll certainly be seeing the variability in the biomass under those trees. So typically at the moment, we have a mean accuracy of that plus or minus 250 kilograms of ground observations. But clearly, when you've got regrowth or you've got other anomalies going on, sometimes it throws it out, and then we rely on you to make some common sense decisions if we're not seeing through to the ground, or we've had a lot of regrowth, or we've got cloud there, for example. You need to be testing the assumptions and the imagery before you make those decisions.
Awesome. Thanks for answering those. And Locke and Stephen, hopefully, yeah, your questions were answered. But if you need anything or want us to continue answering them, we're happy to do so in the Q&A. So just let us know. I might throw things back to you just really quickly. Sorry, I was getting a bit back stuff there. But with understanding, right, average daily gain in food and using AgriWebb, how are you walking your customers through when they're managing in the middle of their grazing plan? I guess, how do you guide them to success?
In terms of making like weight gains, in terms of like matching weight gains to carry
Yeah,
capacity.
so yeah, essentially if your customers are going through the scenarios we talked through, how would you guide them to use AgriWebb to support?
There's so many ways. There's so many, I guess every operation is going to be really unique and different. There's not one way of grazing. And I think that's something that being in my role and sort of the capacity I work with conventional set stock farmers and I work with really interesting, heavily timed grazing in dairy. So I really get to see a vast variety of different grazing strategies. And I think the way that AgriWebb is going to work best for you is the insights that you can take out of it. So you just have to remember that your AgriWebb is only as good as some of its parts. So if there's one particular area, for example, your target residuals in your grazing that's the most important to you, like you want to make sure that forever on your farm you never go below 1,000 kilos of feed per hectare in the spring season or maybe through summer, then that's something that we can provide the data on. So you can set your target residuals, you can have a look at your number of days grazed left and make sure that you're doing your rotational plans that you never hit below that minimum. And I think that's a great goal to have. But you might also have a goal about rest days. So let's say that rest days are most important for your business. So currently during spring, or when we do hit a bit of a warmer temperature where we are at the moment, it's still a little bit cold, bit of snow coming. So we need it to be a little bit warmer before we see a bit of a spring kick. But for that spring kick season, I know on our family farm, we're going to be trying and rotating through our improved pastures. We're not going to have a lot of rest between those. So we're going to be monitoring, I guess, where is that sweet spot between, I guess, that rest period and how nutritionally beneficial the pasture is, and how can we get the most out of it by rotating our fattening steers through, for example. And then in summer, we want to make sure that we're hitting, 60 to 120 days rest. So for us, our rest in data is just as important as our feed on offer data. So I think the way that I'm guiding my customers is work out what's going to be the most beneficial for your business and the most important goal for your operation, and just focus on that one area to start with. And then every 3 months, reevaluate. Can you add more on? Is your growth rate something you want to consider? Do you want to start now that you've done a few manual feed on offer readings? Is Cibo Labs the next step for your operation? Is it grazing management and rotational, using AgriWebb's rotational planner? Like there's start small and then build as you get more confident with all these different parts. And all of a sudden, you'll have a really detailed grazing story that's going to help your business. But if you try and do everything at once, you're going to get overwhelmed and it's hard to do it all. We're all so busy on the ground. We've got a lot on the farm. So focus on the most important part for your operation is my advice, I think.
That's
Thanks.
great. It was a question I was going to ask later, so I'm glad you answered it now, right? It's this idea of, right, chunk it, don't cram it. Let's start with the small. Let's figure out, where you want to go and then
Mm,
build towards that, the final destination.
yeah.
Awesome. And then I saw, thanks for the response in the chat, Phil, to Anne's question. We'll now just get to the final one, final scenario. So, right, in hypotheticals, we've planned for spring grazing, we've since managed in real time, and now we've reached the end of the season where it's time to assess and analyze your completed plan. So, in this case, right, you finished your grazing plan, and we want to assess how your paddocks performed so you can begin planning for that next future grazing movement. So, obviously, things we want to consider, right, are rest and availability for your next rotation. How are things bouncing back? What is the current system looking like compared to other years? So obviously AgriWebb and Cibo Labs can support with this, and we'll toss it over to our crew here. So Phil, I'll kick things off with you really around that comparison piece.
Yeah, so like I suppose our memories fade over time, and even what we did last year sometimes can get a little bit fuzzy. And so we've got some tools here. One of the advantages of our pasture care services, we can actually go back to 2017, so we can look at every paddock, every 10 square meters of the paddock back to 2017 now, and with our feed-based monitor service, we can look at your whole farm at effectively 80-metre resolution, or effectively roughly about a hectare, a bit under a hectare. And so those, to be able to look at last year as the season's progressing, to be able to look at the current season, look at compared to last year, and start to provide some simple analogues. And you can then start to go through, even if you haven't got all the information on the spreadsheet, you can very, very quickly through this graph here on the left-hand side, for example, see that on this particular property, the red line, which is 2025, is pretty much joining up with the last year, the same time of the year, and so the orange and the red lines merging. So it's playing out. The season is playing out very similar to last year, but you can see that variability in the seasons as well. And then at the regional level, understanding what you don't want to happen is when you've got the season's actually starting to go bad, for example, and we've had lots of situations where the New England starts to get dry, and then we've got people making some late decisions, and sheep and cattle pouring into sale yards or into abattoirs. That's not good for you, and it's not good for the supply chain. And to be able to look at your region out and how the season's playing out, and in this case here, that particular property in central Queensland, they're having a cracker season through Western Queensland, and so it's a bit above average in the sort of eastern parts of central Queensland there. But if you go to southern New South Wales, it's been a shocker. And so this could provide some simple tools to really give you some analogues as to how the season's playing out, and to refresh your memory as to what it was like 5 years ago, or even 7 or 8 years ago.
Thanks, Phil. Yeah, I think really cool to see that regional map and see what's happening around you, so you can better understand how your forages, your pastures or paddocks are performing better than those around you, or maybe it's in line. I think that's really, really cool.
And even just to add to that too, Matt, things like adjustments. So we've had a lot of producers in southern New South Wales obviously running out of feed, and things are hopefully going to turn there soon in Victoria. But using maps like that, if you're after adjustment, you can go onto the feed-based monitor and have a look around your district, and also have a look at what's happening further abroad. And we've got people that are shipping cattle from southern New South Wales into Western Queensland. They've been doing that for months now. So this provides you with that information to go looking for adjustment, and also the people to see what the region's playing out like.
Yeah, really insightful.
We are one of those people at home. We sent around 200 head from Jukiong in New South Wales to Longreach. So yeah, it's definitely something that we've all had to consider, and it's one of those things that we didn't use Cibo Labs to have a little sticky beak at, but it probably would have been helpful if we wanted to find some adjustment just a little bit closer to home as well.
Awesome. I'll pass things over to you. Just again, with the analysis, we talk a lot about AgriWebb as a record-keeping tool, right? But you also had mentioned at the beginning that those records do turn into insights and reporting that at the end of a grazing season, hopefully give farmers a snapshot of how things performed and where things landed as they plan for the next season. So I'll let you dive into this DSC stocking load report and even the rotational planner.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks, Matt. This is our DSC load by paddock report. This is available on all of our performance subscriptions. So if you are interested in the grazing, that's sort of the level of plan you need to be on. So I think that's an important one to give some context to as well. This report's really interesting. We go through it a lot, producer groups and things like that, and with clients, is because what we can see here is, for the calendar year or for the financial year, you get a really interesting picture of your stocking rate on average across the farm. So if you were to put this on that DSC per hectare flat rating without the 100 mil rain into consideration, you get this really interesting picture of, you can see when your cows come on or your lambs come on, and when they come off, and sort of when you do use those selling over a year. One of the reports, this is a report that we find really helpful for agronomists. So that's why we sort of encourage to have your DSCs updated. You guys go in based on your production calendars and update your DSCs or LSUs to be as most accurate as possible, is because it informs these reports. Now, you sort of have to understand how much you're taking out to put back in. So an example, in last week at our Cara producer group, we had an agronomist, JJ Venter from Elders, sort of talking about why these reports are so important. And essentially for them, they love seeing these sort of things. They get clients that just export them straight out of AgriWebb, and they sit down together when they do their planning, because they can understand when stock are coming on. So sort of they can see, this is the production calendar sort of situation on farm. when do we have time to spray these paddocks? When do we have time to fertilize? Are we going to be covered with that withholding period? So if you are, putting back into the soil, it's a good one to go through. It also helps identify your most productive and least productive paddocks, which I think is really interesting. You'll see how heavily stocked you've got paddocks are. For this example, you can see draft 2 and draft 3. They're holding paddocks. They're probably not real on farm. But as you go down through that list, you can get a really interesting view of how heavily stocked are some of my pastures. If I go out and do my pasture assessment, are they performing well, or do we need to consider fertilizer strategies, locking them up, maybe adjusting our grazing this season because we've heavily stocked this one particular paddock? Or have we just identified our top performing paddock on farm? Looks great when you're looking at it, the nutrition's still there. Maybe you do a bit of soil testing and see what's going on. But you can use these reports to really get that insight. It just gives you a little bit more than a gut feel. I know a lot of people have that gut feel and you can see it in your pastures, but this is the data to back up your gut feel about your farm. So I think that's one thing. It's really useful for a range of different reasons. You can use these reports. And then our next one, Matt, if you want to go over, this is our grazing chart that's available with our grazing and rotational planner. This looks pretty similar to an RCS grazing chart in terms of just the view of it. And essentially what we can see here is another really nice one that sort of combines that average DSE per hectare and that total load across a time period with the number of days grazed and the number of days empty. So you get that combined view of how heavily stocked your pastures have been, what's the rest period's been looking at. And again, you can just really easily export that out and send it on. Also really helpful for planning. Let's go back last year and see what we did. If we're having a similar season, we can go back and then maybe you planned your moves last year, worked really well, went great on farm, but then this year you're noticing it's a little bit different. What do we need to change, or are we going to replicate the plan, or maybe we didn't do something right last year, we want to fix it. So you can actually go back and look at your historical moves on AgriWebb so that you can make better decisions for the future. But yeah, I think the good thing about this is it's a dynamic plan. Just if you don't have animals in a rotation, but you have this rotational planner, this still gets filled in. So you might only have your steers and weaners on a plan because you're rotating them through a bit faster. So you want to have those on your planner. Maybe you just want to leave your cows for the spring and just kind of have them hanging out. This report still generates, even though they're not part of a plan. So I think that's one thing that a lot of people don't realize. It's a really powerful insight. You get this data without always having to put things into a rotational plan if it's not the right time of year or your business has to fluctuate for whatever reason. For example, locking everything up because we've had a dry summer season, for example. But yeah, does anyone have any questions?
Oh, I see Stephen has another question. Stephen, don't apologize for dominating the questions. This is great. But Stephen asked, how do you determine the seasonal growth rate of a paddock on average for a point in time? And he notes that he religiously enters his rainfall figure and animal movements. So does that make sense?
Yes. I unfortunately am not an agronomist, Stephen, so I probably am not best placed to answer that one, but Phil probably has more insights on that one.
Can chip in there. Is this so? There's if you go to the numerous DPI websites and look at sort of daily pasture growth rates, there'll be some numbers. Even if you go to, I actually just yesterday when you ChatGPT and got it to do a monthly pasture growth rate for central New South Wales for about 30 seconds. When pulled some data from various websites. But what I would say is that they are long-term averages, and just because they're in your particular district doesn't mean they're the same as you. And I suppose if you go to the feed-based monitor, you can very, very quickly get an idea as to what the actual growth rates are on your farm and specific to your farm. So yeah, probably use both, but a really good example, as I was saying earlier on, down at Holbrook the other day, Izzy and I were actually down there together, and they've got an environment there where they typically expect a season break and have an autumn break, and they've had one autumn break and in the last 7 years. So not the growth rates that you'd expect in those areas. So there's a few ways of working it out there.
Yeah, great response. Just to call out again, if folks have questions, we are in our Q&A time, and I've have a few in my back pocket, but definitely want to make sure your burning questions are being answered. In the meantime, Izzy actually did touch on this really nicely. So Phil, I'd love your perspective as well. So maybe a twofold question. I know people always ask this, but I do think it's helpful. But Phil, for you to answer, when someone is just getting started with, let's even just broaden it to data and technology, what is your recommendation on how they start? How should they be thinking through it? I think Izzy touched on some nice points in the fact that, look, think about your goals, choose one, start small. Are there any other things that you would want to add into the mix?
Well, I think it's getting the basics right. So even simple things like getting your paddocks mapped up correctly can help immensely. Looking at your paddock history over time as well as you're starting to look at your record systems. Um, and I mean, I think as we travel around, I think Izzy and I both we go to a lot of field days, a lot of producer events, and those producers that are succeeding are the ones that are trying to keep things simple and really focusing on the execution. And I suppose in the context of what our core business, knowing how much grass you've got is pretty important to your business because it's effectively the money that you've got in the bank. And so anything that you can do to help you understand what the true size of your haystack across your farm and each paddock should actually help you make some more objective decisions.
I love that. You mentioned the producer groups, and I know you both had the chance to do a producer group together in Roma. Maybe this is an out there question, but is there a trend in the questions that you all are getting at those producer groups that would pertain to grazing? And if so, what is it? Sorry if I'm putting you on the spot, but what is it? And then also, how would you answer that? And maybe that's what other people are actually experiencing and just didn't even know that was their question. That makes sense.
God. You want to go that first one, Izzy?
I am very lucky that the producer groups are part of my role, so I get to run a lot of these, probably quite a couple of years. So I get to speak to a lot of different producers, and I think there is a lot of questions coming up about grazing. I think now that with data and record collection, we can really see there is a shift, I guess, in the thoughts around grazing. There's people who are curious. They maybe have done conventional set stocking for the last 30 years and now they're looking at their data, maybe doing a bit more analysis on their operation and just investigating the different options that they have. I'm not saying that everyone needs to go and do, intense time grazing with electric fences that pop up after 12 hours. I just think you now have so much more opportunity to explore new areas of agriculture and also just new ways of doing things very easily. Like it's not a massive deal anymore to just try something, I think, as well. And I think it's really speaking to this industry as a whole that, we are progressing in lots of different ways. We're trying new things, maybe running little projects and seeing how it works for our businesses. And we have the data to back up those decisions as well now. And I think that's where there's a lot of power. In it as well. And I've really enjoyed getting to know a lot of different types of producers and sort of understanding their different grazing needs, having land like twin ewes on better pastures because it's important for their lactation and development and all that sort of stuff. We get a really wide range of grazing types on AgriWebb, and I think that's been really interesting. And it's nice to hear from both sides of the story at these producer groups because someone who conventionally stocked might learn something from someone who rotationally grazes and vice versa. And I think that's really powerful, is the sharing of knowledge and the sharing of information, and also having the data to back yourself if you think about something a bit differently on your operation as well.
Yeah. Look, I suppose the other just from my perspective, obviously we focus on the grass and the feed base, and I think a lot of people, when I go to workshops and field days and things, and ask how many people are doing forage budgeting, there's probably only 5 or 10% of people actually put up their hands. Quite often, most people are using gut feel, and what I would suggest is that when you've been on a property for a lifetime, the gut feel is probably pretty solid. But with people moving around and seasons changing so much, sometimes the gut feel might not be as good as you think it is. And I suppose we've now got these tools to really provide a much more objective assessment of what's going on in the paddock. I had producers in the paddock a few weeks ago in central Queensland, and there was pretty much a 300% difference between the highest and the lowest. And these were people that were interested in their grass and looking across the paddock, and there was effectively a threefold difference between across a group of 30 people as to how much grass they thought there was in the paddock. So there was a clear message there that maybe we can be more objective. And
Amazing. Yeah, thanks for sharing that insight. I think that's really helpful to know, what are the producers in these groups, what are they asking? And I think it's helpful for those joining. I'll finish things here. I like to typically have our panel leave everybody with, a final thought. But before I do that, so Phil and Izzy, I'll give you a chance to think about what you want to leave folks with. But just from AgriWebb and from Cibo Labs, wanted to thank everybody for staying on throughout this entire conversation. Thank you for your questions. We really hope that you found the content valuable and that you're able to feel more confident as you go into spring, as you build, plan, manage, and then obviously assess your grazing plans as we roll forward. Phil, I'm going to start with you for our what's a final takeaway that you'd like to leave the audience with?
well, I suppose it's where I started, that lovely line of John Fritz, how much money have you got in the bank and how much grass have you got in the bank? And we all, as businesses, we're all running businesses. We all look at our cash flow, and your feet in the paddock is no different to looking at your bank balance in terms of your cash flow. It's exactly the same thing. In fact, it's probably more important. So I think we can if you think it in that perspective, then you'll probably be wanting to look at the bank balance of your grass as frequently as you do as the bank balance in your on your phone.
I love that. Yeah, that's such a good takeaway, and I think a lot of folks can agree that's a big one. Izzy, I'll let you round us out. What would you like to leave the audience with?
I think there's a lot to take away today, and my one thing that I just want to reiterate is focusing on your goals and what's actually going to drive value on farm. There's a lot of data collection opportunities available. There's lots of different areas in AgriWebb and with Cibo Labs on how you can understand your business better. But if it's not aligned to your business goals or not aligned in the direction of your business, you're going to find that it's not going to deliver you value. And I think that's something that we always need to remember. There's so many points of data input these days, and I think it's one of those things that we really need to be realistic about. What are we going to come back to and what are we going to revisit? And I think grazing, a lot of people on the call today would be focused on grazing, and so there's lots of areas and growth and lots of places you can explore. But just remember to always bring it back to what's going to help your business improve and what data points are really critical to help you manage your business better. AgriWebb cannot teach you how to farm, but we can give you all the data points to make the best decision for your operation. And that's such an important thing as in farmers as well.
So I love that. I love that. And I think that's a really big takeaway that I'll leave folks with, as well as I think you both on this call are prime examples of just the teams that make up Cibo Labs and AgriWebb and the people that are working day in and day out to support you all as farmers who are, I know it's corny to say, but ultimately feeding this world. Doing a dang good job doing that. So we again just thank you all for joining us. Please reach out if you have any questions in the meantime. We will be sending out a recording of this webinar to everybody who has registered. So hopefully everybody has a good rest of your days, and we'll talk soon and see you on the next webinar.
Thanks, everyone.
You all.